All right. All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2022 semester at Durham. And it's week 10, part 1 of our broadcast and recording together. And this week we have a bit of a journey. We are going to convert our current server to an Express server. Let's see how that goes and how we're going to proceed. So again, we're sitting at week 10. Week 10, we're sitting on Intro to Express. Again, this in-class exercise this week is worth 2% of your final grade, so not a crazy week. One thing that we do have, though, for tonight is, if you notice from last week, we covered MVC, we covered revisited NPM and Yarn, and we also introduced Node.js, what that is, and how to use two different kinds of module patterns. One of them is the require pattern, and the require pattern is the old common JS pattern. And then there's the new ECMAScript 6 pattern, which is the ESM module pattern, which uses the import and from keywords, right? We also modified our package.json as well as tsconfig.json files to support ECMAScript 6 pattern, module pattern. And we installed Nodemon. If you haven't had a chance to do that, please do that today. As well as we created a Heroku account. I asked you guys to do that for homework. And we uploaded our project to Heroku via GitHub. So what about this week? This week we're doing Express, and we can go to expressjs.com. Let's go there really quickly right now. If we go to expressjs.com, it's this piece, and this is where we're going to get all of the documentation for Express.js, right? Going forward, this is where it is. And as well as Express.js, we're going to learn how to install it, configure it. We're also going to be talking about this really weird thing called Middleware Functions. What the heck is middleware, you're going to say? Because that's something that has never been in any other language. So middleware is a weird thing, right? What are they? How do we use them? And then we're going to use the EJS view engine, also called the templating engine, which you can get at HTTP, here, this site right here, which is that one right there. That's the Vue.js. HTTPS, and then it is EJS.co. Oh, damn. I love it when it does that. There we go. So that is the site for EJS, and we're going to talk about basic routing with Express. We're going to render static files. Static files are things like CSS, right? We also have other things like JavaScript, so JavaScript files, as well as HTML content. So those are all static files we're going to render. And then we're going to use the Express generator, which is something that scaffolds out Express, an Express application, on Friday. We're going to do this on Friday. So all of this we're going to do today. Stuff that's due. In-class exercise 10 due on Saturday this week. Lab 3, that's due tonight at midnight. It was moved. I was trying to accommodate your requests. A couple of requests for people. So that's due tonight at midnight. Lab 4 is again way out on the horizon, is due week 14, which is the very last week of semester. Okay, that's when it's due. So on that then, any questions around the stuff that we've got so far? So Cooper says, install these right now, or we'll go over it. We'll go over it together, Cooper. So that is what we've done. What are we doing? Well, let's talk about Express a little bit. Okay. So Express, it was made by this guy, TJ, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name without butchering it. He is a really cool developer, and what he's worked on is more than 500 open source projects that are Node.js related, which are awesome. And he's made this amazing framework called Express. And Express is something that's being used worldwide right at this point. It's based on the Connect framework. So what he did was he took Connect, which makes use of something called middleware functions or middleware architecture. He's taken Connect and extended it to create another framework altogether called Express that includes a bunch of different things, including a really cool routing system. And the routing system allows you to do back-end routing with Express and make, if you really want to, an application programming interface, which is really, really cool. So that is where Express came from. So far, what we've had one big server.js file or a server.ts file. And what we've done with that server.js or server.ts file is we've been able to route everything through this one file. And it'd be really nice if we had multiple files and a routing system on the back end to kind of inject data and do some of the things that we've been doing on the front end. So what we want to do first is install Express, and there's a couple ways to do that. This is definitely one of them, right? But I want to direct you to about slide 9 of our PowerPoint. Slide 9 has a couple things, right? We have the Express itself, Express version we're going to load this week, which is for, as of this recording, it's 4.17.3, right? We're going to take it this way. We're going to use our package.json to do that. In order for me to demonstrate this, instead of using the yarn add or npm install, let's open up our package for today. So again, you guys are section 3. I'm going to make a brand new folder. Let's do this together, guys. This is part of your in-class exercise. ICE 10 is our in-class exercise 10. What we want to do is we're going to grab everything from ICE 9. So copy it, except for our node modules folder, copy it, go back out to ICE 10 and drop it in there. My house is going to burn down, of course, whenever I'm recording. It is what it is. And then we're going to take that ICE 10 and we're going to drop it into Visual Studio Code. All right, so we're going to grab this ICE 10 and go, woohoo, Visual Studio Code it is. Visual Studio Code does not include right now our node modules folder, and we need to make some minor changes. In my package.json, I want to change this to ICE 10. So this is going to change. And we also, in your case, have a README file, which we should also change to ICE 10. You're the only ones. You guys are special. Once we've made those changes, then we can do a yarn install, right? We can do that. And what yarn install does is it installs all the packages that are listed inside of my package.json. Well, what if we wanted to add that package in here again? Let's go back to the PowerPoint and grab that package, Express, and I'll populate this inside of your chat there, right? So there's Express, that's in the dependencies, and we're going to take this other one over here, and we're going to drop that into the dev dependencies. Those are the two things you have to drop in. Let's take those two pieces, and we'll drop them into our package.json and install it that way. Let's see how we do that. So copy that, go back to our package.json, and go where we're going to put it in here. So here is Express, right here. Actually, probably after Bootstrap. Just putting it in order. And then we're going to grab that @types code, which is here. Copy it. And go back to here, and at the top, paste it in. And now we'll save our package.json file. And the way to add it in another way is to add it this way and just issue another yarn install, which means it's going to go out and grab those pieces and put them in, right? And so now inside of our node modules folder, you're going to see that it also has a reference to Express, as well as a reference to @types Express, okay? So that's another way to add modules. As long as they're listed here inside of our package.json, we're good to go. On that, just a question for you really quickly. I've asked this today, and I wanted to check for your learning and your understanding, right? So what's the difference, again, between dependencies and dev dependencies? What's the difference? Why do I need to put things in both, and what do they represent in our package.json? Anyone can answer this question.
I think the dev dependencies give us like code hinting, or it has to do some with
It does do those things. It does do code hinting, but what are dependencies? You know, why is this here in our package? Why do we care? So Anir says something a normal user doesn't need hints of. No, we need hints for everything. We are normal users. Yeah. Why do we have dependencies in our package.json? What is this package.json thing we're using anyway, right? Yes.
Types of like
All right. Let's go through. So dependencies, like the word kind of says, is we depend on them for our app to function. Without dependencies, these dependencies loaded into our node modules folder, our app would not be able to function at all. It would not work, period, the end, right? Dev dependencies, our app doesn't require dev dependencies. We do. We're the developer. That's why we have these dependencies, so that way we can get good code hinting, like you guys said earlier, all right? So this part is required. This part is optional. Without this part, our app will not run. Okay, that's why it's a dependency. Okay, let's put this up on GitHub. So git add dot git commit -m. We'll say added support for Express. Because that's what we did. We just added Express in there, right? All right, so now that we have Express in there, let's take a look at a current status of our server. So our server kind of looks like this, right? And let's take a look at this insanity that we have here, okay? Just as an example. We have our, a bunch of stuff, HTTP, our file system, our URL, and MIME types. These three pieces here, right? These are pre-bundled packages or modules, right? And these are pre-bundled Node.js modules. That's what these are. And we use these pre-bundled modules without having to attach or load anything through Yarn, okay? And this one is a third-party module. And we loaded the third-party module, but first we had to add it into our node modules folder. And we did that by using Yarn, okay? We have both a host name and a port, right? But if you try to make this run up on, and we tried to make this run up on Heroku, it wouldn't run. And the reason for it is because a couple things. One, our port number, which is 3000, does not compute on Heroku. Heroku needs something else. It needs a process.environment.port or port 3000. That's how we should kind of make our port run, okay? And of course, we know this is not going to be a number. It's going to be whatever port happens to be. Localhost is cool locally, but localhost isn't going to compute for online, so we can remove localhost altogether, right? We don't need to use localhost, right? And one thing to note is we're using a parsed URL, and that's really cool for URL, but let's not use that for now. I'm just going to modify what we had before to get you guys to the same space as everyone else. Instead of doing this, what we want is that path is equal to our request.url. That's what that path is, okay? And we can get rid of it and just look at it like this. If my path is equal to / then what my path should be is /index.html. That's what something that it should be like. And when we read our file, then we want for our file to be like is we want to take that path variable as an example, and that path variable is what we want to add in with our directory names. We can say __ dir name plus our path. That equals to a viable path that we can read a file from. This can be data. This is what we had before. And so this is how the server looks. One thing we talked about was that the server is immutable. The server cannot work, right? You know, it cannot be changed after it's been instantiated. We talked about that as well, right? And this server immutability thing, it happens when we create our server. The only way we can change something, as an example, that is in the server is to restart it. And that's why we use Nodemon. Nodemon allows us to restart the server. Okay, let's continue. We have some errors. So we did this. We could JSONify the string, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to say a little error. We're going to say error 404 file not found. We can do that, right? We can give a little error. Set header no sniff. This is for our content type. Mime type we're trying to install Mime type as we're looking up the path, but the path has to be sanitized. We can say, yeah, path is a string, and I want to get a substring of the path, right? I want to use the substring as the path, and let's just cast a path, this path here, as a string, just to silence some of those errors, okay? And then finally, we want to output our data. We don't need our host name. That is optional. We don't need our host name. And the only thing we need to say is that server is running on port with a port number. So that is where everyone else left off. You guys were a little bit delayed because unfortunately Friday for you guys was the first day we got together to do this part. Okay, so save, and I want to do Control-Shift-B to transpile, right? You should always do Control-Shift-B to transpile your code because we're using TypeScript. Again, Control-Shift-B is the command. Control-Shift-B, right? However, what if Control-Shift-B doesn't work? Let's just get out of this. I can Control-C out of it, right? Or stop the transpilation process. What if I wanted to do it manually for those people who can't make Control-Shift-B work for some reason? You can always do TSC minus W, sorry. TSC minus W will also start the transpilation process just by itself. So that is TSC minus W. That's the watch task. So you can do that with the watch task. So Control-C, get out of there. And if I wanted to try it again with Control-Shift-B, I can do that. Control-Shift-B, and I can start the watch task this way. I need to start the watch task because without the watch task, we're not transpiling. Cool. So that's what we did last day. We kind of had this little server that was immutable. The server itself is using, like we talked about before, this factory kind of method pattern. And the factory method pattern, whenever we have a create keyword for the server, what it does is it instantiates a perfect server for us, right? We pass in some requirements, a request object, a response object. We pass in these two requirements. And then once we pass in those requirements, what we're doing here is we're saying, let's get the requested URL, right? Let's set it as the path variable. Let's print that out to see what that looks like. So that's what that looks like right now. And then if the path is slash, we can also check to see, and I've did this differently in some other classes, if the path is equal to /home, either one of those things, that means it works out to be index.html. That's what that means. So if the path is either slash or /home, let's convert the path to index.html. That's what we're saying. And we can have a series of things here in the path. That means that matches every link on our page. But that kind of defeats the purpose of our router, which we're going to set today. Our file system module, what it does is use read file to read the directory name, the current directory, plus this path, right? And we're passing in a callback function, which has both two parameters, an error and data. The error triggers if we can't find this thing, the file in the path. Typically, if we have an error, we want to write a 404, which basically is going to indicate to the user that the file wasn't found, and we're going to return. Otherwise, if everything is found, we can set the header with the content type options of no sniff. This is a security protocol. So a security guard function, right? And the guard function basically is a middleman, between the someone who is trying to sniff out the MIME type. MIME types we talked about last day were file types. Are they CSS? Is it JSON data? Is it an image? Is it a movie? What are you trying to load? A malicious attacker could sniff out the type and then use that to do something bad, a bad actor. We don't want that to happen. So instead of that, what we do is we use this content header that removes the ability for you to sniff out the MIME type. And then we look up the MIME type, the name of the file. We remove the slash, we sanitize it a little bit, and we pass this type that we detect into the content type object when we write the head out to the page. That's what's happening. So we write the head out. 200 is everything is okay, right? We write this content out to the page, and we're good to go. We don't even need this extra little space here. It works just like this. Save. After we've constructed our server, this is this piece right here, from line 12 to line 35, we've constructed and configured our server. Then on line 38, we listen for any kind of incoming request to the server. And that includes not just the URL, but anything that index.html includes. For example, if I go to my index.html page, and if I go through it, scrub right through it, it reads a bunch of things at once. It reads each link, each script, right? And all these scripts plus the bottom script, it reads a bunch of times. And each time it reads something, it goes back to my server.ts, and it is a new request from my server to handle. So one request kind of spawns a bunch of additional requests. Does that make sense? Right? Because what's happening is the first request is getting a file. We load the file up, and when we respond with that file, when we're doing that, it actually, as it's reading, it actually starts the other files going as well. We read all of those files so that the server object itself gets a bunch of requests for one single page. Let's see it in action. And to see it in action, we're going to use Nodemon. So again, the expectation is that Nodemon is working on your system. We can just type in Nodemon, and it's going to listen on port 3000. So notice that process.environment port or 3000. That means if I'm up on Heroku, right? Can Heroku give me port 3000? No, it cannot. Can I tell Heroku to give me port 3000? No, I cannot. It's going to tell me what it's going to give me. And it's going to tell me what my host name, the file name that it's going to give me, the IP address is going to give me all that stuff. I have no control. Most web services don't do that. They tell you what you're going to use. By the way, Tom, here are the services you can use. Here's your IP address. Here's your port number. So I want to get that from Heroku. I don't want to suggest that it's 3000. But however, locally, because I haven't defined my port as an environment variable, I want to use 3000 instead. And that's why it's running locally at port 3000. All right, let's go back up to the page then and try it out. So on the page, I'm going to go to here and refresh. And you can see that I have my full site. Yay! My full site's working now, right? And I can go from one page to the other. And when I do that, up, kind of in my server, I can see that there's a bunch of requests. Not just a few requests, but every time I go to the each page, it loads a bunch of different views. Take a look here, right? So I started with my slash. It opened up bootstrap disks, CSS, bootstrap.min.css, app.css, my namespace, and all of this up to here was the first page I contacted. Then I went to the next page, and it did it again, right? All the way down to, first of all, it read all the maps, right, as an example, and then it started reading all of my content. Every time I go and load a piece of content, it actually goes through the server again, every single time. That's how it works. And because we're reading all static files, that's what's happening. We're reading every static file from the server, right? And we're telling them what type it is. It's just going to work. It just works. Okay? And that's pretty awesome. Okay? This part, my console log, I put that in there, console log. Here's something I want to ask you guys when it comes to console log, right? Is console log, and this is a question for you and for everyone else, is console log synchronous or asynchronous? What do you think it is? And this is for anyone to answer. Is console log synchronous or asynchronous? What do you think it is? Anybody? Cooper says sync. He's taking a break. He's trying. It's synchronous. And that means, what is that a good thing or a bad thing if it's synchronous? What does synchronous mean? Right? There's synchronous and asynchronous. What does synchronous mean? Synchronous means that it's going to perform this function and wait for this function to be completed before doing something else. That's synchronous. Do we want to wait on a server? The answer is no. We don't want to wait, which means any synchronous function like this is actually a really bad thing, because what's going to happen is that when you access the server, when I have a synchronous call like console log, it's going to slow things down. Imagine if I have 20 people looking at the server and they're accessing this thing, right? It's going to wait every single time for each of the requests. Before it actually does the request, it's going to go through here and console log. It's going to wait till the console log is complete. And by the way, it's going to wait for me to have that path variable ready to go, right? It's going to take that, spit it out, and when it's done, then it's going to continue the rest. So it won't even do this part until this part is complete. And that's really bad. That's really, really bad. So console logs are great for us as developers, bad if you leave them here and they're up online on your server. It really slows down your server, so I highly recommend you remove them, right? So what do we do? How do we do to make this better? Well, let's take a look back at our process. We've just installed Express. We've done this right now, and we want to install Express, and there's two ways we can do it. One of them is we can use the old way of doing Express where we say const express is equal to require express. I'm missing an equal sign here, right? Where const express equal to require express. We can use this way. This is the common JS module pattern, or we can use the other module pattern, which is here. And this module pattern uses ESM, the ECMAScript module pattern. And this is what we want to use. So I'm going to take this whole piece right here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to pop it into the chat for you guys to use for a second. Now, I don't want you to replace everything. I want to talk about every piece of it slowly as we go. So bear with me as we do this. Okay. So what I want to do is go back to our app. So here's our app right now, and we have a bunch of stuff happening. I want to comment everything out. So let's comment everything out. So I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to toggle block comment. And at the top here, I want to give myself some space. So I'm going to kind of enter this stuff in. So this is the Node.js way, and it was kind of low level. We had to deal with MIME types, and some stuff didn't load properly. I want routing. I want a bunch of other functions to work. So how do I do that? Well, first I'm going to import Express from Express. You see that I get code hinting on that. If you don't get code hinting, you get an error right here. It means that you have to yarn install or npm install, because you haven't installed Express. Okay, somehow you missed that step. Next, once we have Express, we want to create a new app, which is just going to be we're going to call the Express constructor, and this is going to create the application. Yeah, that's what it's going to do. All right, that's the next piece I want. After that, I want to define my port, and I don't want to retype it. It's right here on line 19. I'm just going to copy it from line 19 and paste it in. So const port process env port is or 3000 is the port that I'm going to use. Okay. Then I'm going to use my app, and I'm going to say that when the app or the slash path, the default path, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a callback function that's going to have a request response object. And inside of my request response object, I'm going to response.send something like hello world. Okay, that's my response object. And guys, guess what? So far, that's the server. And at the end, I'm going to app.listen. And I'm going to listen on a specific port, right? And that port, we're going to use a callback function, right? And the callback function is going to say something like console log, server listening on port. And I want to do a template string here, just like we did before. So here's my template string. And I want to inject by using the $ curly brace syntax. I want to interpolate or inject the port that's in here that we defined earlier. And guys, this is our server now. See all this? A lot of it is fixed by using Express. And we'll talk about that in a second. Let's save this and see if we're able to get a hello world now using Express. All right, so again, going back out to this, if I go to enter, you can see that I'm back to this, right? So if I click on, 3000, well, somehow it failed. Why did it fail? So let's take a look at our logs and let's take a look at our node and see what happened. Well, we're listening on port 3000, right? So what did we do wrong? Okay. let's take a look here and see what we did wrong. So I went on port 3000, I refreshed, and it's going to spin forever, and it's not going to work. So what happened? I mean, it restarted our server, so this should kind of work, right? Well, let's take a look and see what happened. First of all, always check, did we transpile? Did we transpile? So take a look at your server.js. Is your server.js like this one, my server.ts? And the answer is, it looks pretty good, right? It looks pretty good. What else? Why else did we not? Sometimes, by the way, it's good to just restart your server. It's just restart manually. If you restart your server and there's no errors, that means that the server itself is formed up correctly. That's the first thing, right? So we know this is okay. We made an Express application, and we're using the Express application, and we're listening to the Express application on port 3000. We know that part. So what else? Well, we didn't specify the port, so let's listen on that port. So we'll say res. We'll say that listen, we can specify where we're listening. That's the issue. So that's one thing we didn't do. So save. It'll restart the server. And if I go back up here and refresh, now it's working fine. So we need to specify at least the port here. And you can see that listen, there's 5 overloads, and one of them requires a port. We need one. The other thing we want to do is we want to say that export default is equal to app. That's what I want to do. And what this means is that we're going to make the app the default module that's exporting. This has now become a module. Whenever we use the export keyword in TypeScript, then the file we're using the export keyword in, it becomes a module. And if I look at the server.js file, sure enough, you have exports.default is equal to app when we translate it into regular JavaScript. So export default app. It doesn't have any difference in functionality. Still does the same thing. Even if we type in some weird stuff, it's still going to give us hello world. Heck, it's going to give us hello world forever. Okay? So all of this stuff, I mean, we don't need much of it. The only part that we didn't do is this file system read thing. We didn't do this read file, all right? We could certainly replace our stuff that we have here in our server, right, where we have our app use. We can replace it with a file system read if you still want to. So again, if you wanted to import fs from fs, you could totally do this, and then you can drop in, you can drop in this file system stuff right here. We can do all of this, and you'd have to do all of that inside of the app.use. So all of this piece. So you'd have to grab all of this, right? All of this part, and maybe up to here, stuff that's inside of your server. And you take this part, and you go into this piece right here and replace it. So you kind of do one of these. You could do that. We'd also have to say what lookup is, which is a Mime type, right? We have to load the Mime type again. As here, we missed that part as well. Let's just copy paste it so you can see it. That's this part. We could do this, but it defeats the purpose. And we're going to get back in here in a second and talk about why, right? Because this doesn't really allow for good routing. We want to have routing work. If I was to put these pieces in there, then theoretically app.use, it's going to do routing. Let's see if this works. So save, go back up here, and if I refresh, it's going to say there is no file like this. There's no file like this. But what about if I go here? Now my site's back, right? So it's a little bit shorter than this one. Okay. Let's get rid of all the commented stuff. We don't need this anymore. And so our Express app looks eerily similar to what we already have. It's about 40 lines of code, as an example. But we have all this piece in here, this file system read stuff, which is very specific. And we don't want to do this file system read stuff. Instead, what we want to do is we want to do routing. So this is kind of our first kick at the can for what our server looks like. Let's put this up on GitHub. So we can say something like git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say created Express server version 1. Okay, we're going to have other ones. We're going to talk about what those are. So that is our first kick. So very similar to Node, but there's a lot less going on. We've specified a Mime type, as an example, but do we really need a Mime type? We're going to see that we don't. And we'll talk about how we can simplify a lot of this going forward. Okay, so we really didn't do anything. We just replaced Node with Express. So not much of a replacement. We're not even using the app properly. Back to this. So now that we've created our server, it'd be really nice, and we're listening on port 3000 like we said before, but what we want is to understand how app use works. App use is a method that mounts middleware. Okay, what is middleware? And res send, it actually sends off our content type header, right? Which means we don't really need MIME types when using Express. That's interesting. Does that mean then that I can go here and remove the MIME type lookup where I say I'm going to write head 200 and all that kind of stuff like we did before? Well, remember, we want to res send, not res end. We've used this old way of doing things. We replaced what we had here before with res end. Okay, well, if that's true, then can we replace all this with res end to res send, and we want to send the data off? Is that possible? Can we do that? We read data, send the data. And let's see what happens when we do this. If it actually does the same thing, does it solve our problem? And well, let's just go to the first site. And well, no. It actually sends off, it tries to get me to download, right, the application. That's what it does, right? Res send, it actually populates the data. All right, that's what res send does. So what about res end? Can I do this, res end by itself? Is that something I can do? And without the data being populated, let's see if this works. So again, I'm going to go to the top here and res end. And again, you can see that I can see all of my types, no problem. And I never had to use any kind of MIME type at all. Look, MIME types not required, which means I don't need all this MIME types at all. I can get rid of all this stuff. We still need file system read, but MIME type, see you later. Okay, we don't need that at all. Cool. Well, if that's true, res end, then let's get rid of it inside of our package.json. We have our MIME type. We don't need that anymore. Let's get rid of it. So the way we get rid of it is we'd say something like yarn remove MIME types, right? And press enter. That removes it from our dependencies. And yarn remove @types / MIME types -- dev, which we're hoping is going to remove it from dev dependencies. And it's gone. Not only does it remove it from here, guys, but it also removes it from our node modules folder. So now we don't have any MIME types anymore. Did we break something? So if I go back out to my site and if I refresh, well, we can't. It's the same problem we had before from this part, but we still have everything else working as it should. Okay, that's the same stuff we had last time that we were left off. Okay, so nothing different than what we had. Okay, so that is this. Awesome. So we can certainly do this, the read file stuff. And we've replaced our server with an app.use. App.use mounts middleware. And so what this is middleware that is put into place that kind of comes into the server before anything else. But it begs the question again, well, what the heck is middleware anyway? Right, because that's what app.use does. It mounts this middleware function. Well, when we started Nodemon, we got this localhost 3000, we did that. Let's first talk about a couple things before we talk about middleware. Express comes with 3 different objects, where Node only really uses 2. Express comes with this application object, right? It comes with a request object, and it also has a response object, right? Like we've talked about before, right? But then it also uses something called middleware. Let's do a little bit of a case study on what middleware is. So again, the question is, what the heck is middleware? It's just a function that's in between two other functions or two other pieces of software, right? So imagine that a request is received by the server, right? It kind of, before it goes to the route handler, if I'm going to route on the back end, it might go through another middleware function, one or more middleware functions. These are all optional. When that's done, then it routes to the route handler. And before the response is completely sent, it also might route through a bunch of other middleware functions. And then finally respond. So why are these functions important? Well, they can include a lot of functionality that we don't have right now. And due to the asynchronous nature of JavaScript, we want to run these functions asynchronously. Okay? So each middleware function then has access to the HTTP request and response objects, as well as something called next. And we're going to get to what that next object is. Let's try this out. And we talked about how our console log is blocking code. Let's make a little middleware function of our own. We're going to use this app.use syntax. I'm going to populate it inside of their chat. And this app.use middleware function, let's take it, and I'm going to use it, drag it, I'm going to kind of copy it right in here. I'm going to do it just before our app use slash. So we're going to say, let's use a middleware function, and the function is going to get the request, response, and the next object. And what we're going to do with that object is we're going to do a console log. Here's our console log like we had before. And we want to output that path variable. Okay, I want to do that. This path, which is the path from the request object, that's what the path URL is. So let's just output the request URL. Let's output the request URL and then call the next function. So this is our custom middleware function, right? And what this is going to do is it's going to trigger asynchronously. Okay, let's not put this path function in here anymore because the console log is synchronous. This is going to run asynchronous. I'm going to not wait for the console log to trigger before I call the next function. So the next function is in the next in line, which is this one. Okay, app use, it attaches a middleware function, right, to the app object. Okay, that's what it does. So we take that custom middleware function and we attach it to the app object. And then what we're going to do is chain. We have a series of middleware functions that it's going to go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. It's going to chain all these functions together. Okay, so let's see how this works. So if I go back to our page, right, and if I go to the home page and I press enter, and if I put, kind of go back to our server, then we can see that we have all of this. This is coming from our little middleware function, but it's non-blocking. That's an example of middleware. What we wrote, we use the next function call. We pass in this next parameter comes from Express, right? And we're saying is I want to get access to the next function. The next function is the next middleware function that's being attached to the app. So here's my app object. I attach the first one. I attach the second one. By the way, guys, order matters when it comes to how they're connected. It matters, okay? So that's interesting. So the request object calls next, and the next middleware is what gets called in the pipeline. So let's think about this pipeline. And the pipeline kind of looks like this. We have an incoming request, right? And then it hits a middleware function. The middleware function, creates a response and sends it to the response object. And then it calls the next function, which calls the next middleware function in line. Also does some kind of construction of produces another response that gets added into the response object. And then again, the next one, and the next one, and the next one, all on down the line until it is terminated by a response object. That's how it works. How do you know which one is middleware? Well, all of these are middleware, and whenever we use the app use keyword, that use specifies that it's middleware. We'll come back to this in a second. All right, so that is how middleware works, right? And let's talk about different types of middleware. So one type is application level middleware when we use the app.use method, okay? Then the other one is router level middleware, which is using the router.use method. So if I want to do any kind of routing, that's application middleware, but it's part of Express, okay? It's built in. We also have other built-in middleware functions like Express Static, which kind of links to static files to our application. Express.json, where we respond with a JSON object, right? As well as an error handling middleware. The error handler, what it does is it catches any kind of errors. And this, again, we put this at the end of the server configuration, where it catches any errors, and those errors are going to be output as potentially a 404 or 500 or whatever it is they're catching at the end. So kind of an error handling middleware. As well, there is a really great list of popular third-party middleware functions that we are going to be using throughout the semester. And each of these functions we're going to be using, every single one. Okay? Body Parser is a third-party middleware function. Again, what it does is it takes the request body. Request body is made up of things like any kind of form of variables that have been included. Things like, for example, your username and password. It's inside the request body. When I post my form, any variables are posted inside of the request body, right? Compression, kind of a really cool way of compressing our data flow, our data stream. Connect Flash is a middleware function that allows us to produce flash messages or error messages in pages that are going to refresh. It kind of stores temporarily that message in session storage, and then when the page loads again, if there's a message in session storage, it throws it inside of our page as an error, right? Or as a happy message. You did good, as an example. By the way, take a look at the weekly downloads for these. 25 million weekly downloads for Body Parser, 14 million weekly downloads for compression, a lot less for Connect Flash. Cookie Parser is 2.6. Cores, which is cross-origin resource sharing. It allows you to have two little servers on the same box, on the same server, where you have, let's say, a backend, which is Express, and a front end that is something like Angular, React, or Vue, and they can communicate with each other on the same box. If you try doing that without including cores, it'll give you a security error because it's a security problem, right? However, you're basically saying to your security that, hey, I'm good. It's me. I'm the one that set up these two little servers talking to each other. Again, 9.2 million downloads a week. These modules we would add, yes. Debug, huge, an amazing module that gives us really great debugging capabilities with color-coded, kind of information inside of our console. 184 million downloads a week. Express Session allows us to create a session object and store it in session storage. Helmet, which cleans up our HTTP headers and kind of shores up any holes, security holes that are in there. Like it says, it's not the silver bullet, but it can certainly help. 1.9 million downloads. Mongoose connects to MongoDB. Morgan, that comes from Dexter Morgan, which is really cool, is a logger middleware, which is really awesome, right? And then Passport, again, which is a middleware function that allows us to get authentication, connecting with something like Mongoose or some other database, which is really awesome. We're going to add Passport later on this semester. Serve favicon. It allows you to serve, like it says, a favicon, which is a little visual cue that's at the top of your browser and your tab that kind of shows your company logo or something else like that to identify a site. Again, you can see these are all millions of downloads, which is pretty crazy. And that's how popular middleware is. You add them in. One question I had today was, how come we don't include all of these all the time, right? Well, remember, maybe you don't need all this stuff, right? If we had a very simple site and we only were serving static files, we didn't do dynamic routing, then a lot of this stuff might not be really required, okay? Let's continue. So that is your third-party middleware. Any questions around middleware and what it is? You should now know, after we did a little case study, what is middleware, right? And how does it work? Well, the answer, your short answer should be, I'm going to ask you this next week. The short answer should be middleware is functionality that I want to plug into my application, and I want it to be plugged in asynchronously. All right, let's take a look back at those three objects. We talked about three objects that are included in our Express application. One of them is the application object. The other one is the request object, and the third one is the response object. Let's go back to the application object. So if we use app set, right, what it does is it configures Express by setting some environment variable, something that's part of the Express framework. App get gets the environment variable that is stored inside of the environment, okay? App engine specifies the view engine that we can use in Express. And a view engine, think about this, we've created a view template ourselves. We made our own single page application to get us to this point. This whole semester we've been working to get to this point, right? And we don't have a view engine. We made our own little one through app.js, right? On the front end. Well, Express comes with a bunch, and you can specify which view engine you're going to use. And of course, this semester we're going to use EJS, right? App locals, it used to send application variables to all render templates. App use, again, mounts middleware app and replace verb with other kinds of connections. For example, app.get, right, and app.post. Those are different verbs that you can use here, and they have the same kind of structure, path, and callback. And you can have multiple callbacks that you're calling at the same time. App route, if I want to kind of use routing, kind of server-side routing, I can say app route, whatever the path is, example, /about, right? And then the verb, get. If you're making a get request, as an example, then you can use, call or invoke the callback function that's related to the get request. Example, display about. That might be the get request callback function. And then you can chain your requests so you can have more than one type of request, a get request and or a post request. And suppose that the /about page had a small form, and when we actually clicked on the submit button, it caused a post request to trigger. That post request would be able to invoke this callback function, a second callback function, whatever that is. So you can actually chain your requests together in your router, which is really awesome. And that's why we're going to go with back-end routing, which is also much more secure than front-end routing. All right, so that is basically your application object. There's many more things that we can talk about there, but these are the basic things we're going to cover this semester. Your request object has also a bunch of parameters. One of them is the query, right? The query basically is if you have a question mark after the index.html or your file, anything that's your query string, it'll store it right in here inside the query property. Params are any parameters that are stored after the index.html. So for example, if I had something like /about and then a hashtag and some other kind of parameters, those hashed parameters would be included here inside of our parameters object. Request.body, we mentioned, anything that you can put in the body that comes from a post request is situated and stored in here. Okay. Request.param, you can specify the name. Request.path, request.host, and request.ip, all information that you can get from the user when they make a request on your server, which means that, guys, anything you do online, like I said before, is visible. I can get your IP address, I can get your host name, I can get your path, I can do all that stuff. I can even know what browser and everything else you're using. I know who you are, what you're doing on my site. And I can take that information and sell it, to the highest bidder, okay? And that's why it's be careful when you go on a site. Browse, in incognito mode. Make sure that you have all of your pop-ups blocked and all those kind of things, because you don't want people to know what you're doing unless you really don't care. Request.cookies, again, it invokes the cookie parser middleware, and there's a lot of other stuff that you can do with your request object. The response object also very powerful. The response object can respond with the status code, again, 200, 304, 500, whatever the status code is. I can also set a field value, right? So a response HTTP header if I really want to, right? I can respond with a cookie. So I can set a cookie, and I create a cookie with a maximum age, store it as cookies on your browser if I really want to. And this is a really popular one, response redirect. We can use this to move our site from one URL to the other through our router. So a good example of this is, let's suppose you're trying to get to a secure area of your site, like your contact list, and you're not logged in. I could response.redirect to the /login page. And that's what response redirect does. It redirects us to that part of our page, right? So, which is kind of neat. And other things that are there, response send, we tried to do that, right? There's also response end. We saw what that does. Response.json converts your response into a JSON format. So again, let's suppose you don't want a view engine on the front end, and you only want to use the back end to access your data. Let's say it's only connected. It's not a true MVC framework that you're kind of connecting on the back end. What we're doing is we're just using our model and our controller, and the model and controller is connecting with the database, right? And it's returning JSON data that's going to be consumed by the front end. So for example, let's say you have a really robust front end, better than ours and better than that you can get from Express, like Angular or React or Vue. You have one of those more complicated front ends, and they might consume JSON data. They're going to do their own routing, right, on the front end, and they're going to also use routing on the back end when it comes to getting information from the server. So really interesting the way it works. And you can respond with JSON. And the best one is res render. This is pretty awesome too. Res render, what it does is it creates or constructs a view, a dynamic page, right? So render means draw, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to use the view engine, right? We're going to use our view template, which is for us index.html, and we're going to construct a page, just like we're doing now with our single page application, but we're going to do it on the back end, right? Which our back end is going to control how we're going to put together our view. All right, that's the response object. So those three pieces, the application, the request, and the response object, are the things that we're going to see a ton of this semester. All right, so when we render views then, we want to use some kind of templating engine or a view engine, like we said. For us, this semester, we're going to use EJS, and just like before, we need to install it. The way it's going to work is we're going to request a view. The request is going to go to the controller. It may or may not go to the model and load up some information from the database. Maybe the database is over here. The model is going to return the data to the controller. The controller then is going to request the appropriate template in the view. And then from the appropriate template in the view, it's going to return and res render or construct the view that we need to see as HTML output. That's how it works, which is very, very interesting. So again, we have these two methods, but the main one we want to use is res render, where we render a view, right, from the view engine. In order for us to do that, we need to install EJS. And let's do it manually this time again. So instead of using EJS inside of the package.json file, we'll just install it with yarn or npm. Let's do that. So here, I'm just going to go to PowerShell, and well, we're going to say yarn add EJS. Okay, and if we do that, you can see now that in the package.json, it's been added in. But we also need the type definition library, which would be nice to have as developers. So again, yarn add at types EJS, right? And then --dev, which is going to give us code hinting for EJS as well, right? Nice. And to this point, are you with me? Check mark if you're with me. You've installed EJS and Express. You're running your Express, your version 1 of your server, and you're ready to go to the next step. Okay, I got Cooper, Emin. How are we doing, Maximus? Are you with me? And Willie, Anur. And it's okay to watch as well, because I know I'm going at a rocket pace. But remember, all we're doing is we're building on what we did last day. That's all we're doing, okay? So now that I've added in, thank you for that feedback. Now that I've added in EJS, we're not going to import it. Why? Because our server, we can use EJS, right, as we're creating our view engine. One thing we're going to do is in the next page, it talks about a few lines of code we're going to use. I'm going to copy this and put it inside of our chat. And what we want to do is we want to use our path variable. So up here inside of our, next to our file system, we're going to say import path from path, right? That's path is a bundled, pre-bundled variable, pre-bundled. So this is pre-bundled Node.js module. That's what that is, the path, right? And what we want to do is we want to define, after we have our port defined, we're going to go here, we're going to say app, right? And we're going to say app.set. We're going to set the view folder, right, to the path.join dir name, which is our global directory name variable, with our views folder. Okay, that's our views folder. Okay, there's views. So app set view is views. That's the first thing. So where is our view? All of our views are in views. Okay, that's the first thing we want to set. And we want to make sure that this says views, not view. So our views, anytime I want to see anything in our, when we set up our view engine, all of our views are inside this views folder. This one. That's what we're saying. And what we're doing is we're joining the path, the views folder, to the main path, that we've got. Okay. Next, we're going to say that app.set our view engine. We're going to set it to EJS. Okay. That's the next thing on the path. So here what we said is, hey, from now on, anytime we look at views, right, we're going to go through our view engine to look inside there. So this is a bit of configuration. So this is app configuration. Okay, but we've been really configuring app the entire time. But here's when we actually do some sets, set some, kind of environment variable. Views is an environment variable that belongs to Express, and so is view engine. There's special variables that we want to set and configure. All right, next. Next. So that's great. That's awesome. Does it break anything? So if I go back to here, and if I go to what we had before and press enter, and we're still good. We can still go from one site to the other and no problem, because right now everything is working. Now we're going to break it, okay? Because up until now, what we've been doing is using a file system read to read everything. And yeah, okay, this is okay, but it's not really routing in any way, right? We want to have back-end routing, not front-end routing. Okay, how does this work? So let's go back and modify this. So now that we've done that, we've specified what the views folder is. And what we need to do is everything inside of the views folder in the future is going to have a .ejs extension. Right now, each file we have in the .ejs folder has a .html extension. Okay, and we're going to use the res_render method to target the view template, and we're going to load that particular template, and we could inject stuff using our view engine. So what we want is some kind of HTML document with an .ejs ending. Let's just use our index.html and convert it to EJS. So again, I'm going to go here where I have my index.html. Here it is. And I want to copy it. So copy. I want to go into the views folder because that's where it's going to look. And I want to paste it in. And then what I want to do is I want to rename it to index.ejs. This converts our index to an EJS template. However, it's not really complete. The way EJS works, if we look up online, EJS has a specific syntax. It uses two tags, a less than % and a % greater than, and anything that's inside the middle gets injected in here, okay? Where did your yarn error log? Where? What error log?
In your file structure there, right above yarn log. Second last one.
Oh, this one. That's not me. That's it put that in there automatically for me. So there's something that it didn't find or whatever, and it put it in there. If I didn't find a file or something, it's gonna create a yarn error. Right? So again, things to check are in the package.json if there's anything missing. And so far, no. Because we kind of added EJS and we removed Mime types. That's all we've done so far. Okay. We also have Express and Express here, so those two things have been added in. But that's all we have here. I'm not sure where that got added in. It got added in automatically. I didn't put it in. All right, going back to my index.ejs though, if I go back here, I need these less than % and % greater than. These are starting and end tags for EJS, and anything that's next to the equal sign gets injected into that location. I had a comment today that this looks very similar to JSP. And yes, it does. Right? So EJS could have been used at any time. And remember, we're going to use our, you can install it the way we did it. We can use it inside of our Node.js. So for something like this, we can say let EJS require. This is require pattern. Or we can say something like, you know, this is cool. Let's inject EJS render this template. And we want to inject the object that has a people property inside of here. That's what we're doing, okay? And the same thing goes, we can actually use it right in regular script like here, download it in a browser. We can actually put it inside of a script of our own. So we don't really need to use it on the back end. We can use EJS on the front end, which is pretty awesome, okay? So that is HTML. We can render that HTML. We can inject that anywhere we want. So if that's true, then, right? If that's true, then what we can do is we can do something like in our index.ejs, which is inside of our views folder, right? We can go in here and we can say something like % equals, right, to something like title. And that is a couple of tags that tell me that we're going to inject a title object inside of the title element, okay? And I can do the same thing. Let's copy this. And I'll hard code another thing we can add down in here. We can say, let's have an h1 tag. And in that h1 tag, let's also inject the title. Okay? Just as an example, this is our test. We want to keep all of this, but let's just remove for now the app.js. Let's just remove the last one. This app.js we're not going to use. We're not going to use our front-end routing anymore. We're going to try and do it back-end by doing it this way. So let's save that index.ejs. Once we've got this saved, now that we have a template, we can use res render. So how does that look? Well, that looks like this. Let me take this little piece of code here and copy it and drop it right into your chat. Here it is. And what we want to do here is, let's go back to our code. Inside of our server.ts, here it is. I'm just going to kind of close some of these off. In our server.ts, what I want to do is just before the app, I'm going to say something like, I want to create a router, const router is equal to express.router. Okay, that's what I want. So our router is going to create another piece of our application. Okay, we're going to add in express routing. So we're going to create an express router. That's what we're instantiating. Okay, that's the second thing we're doing. Okay, and what I want to do is before we get to the views, before we do all this work that we're doing here, right? Instead of using this app.use stuff that we have in here, where we serve up a static set of files, and it's all happening on the front end. We want to not do this at all. Let's get rid of this piece. Okay, so no more app use. Let's also not log everything. We don't want to use this for now. Let's get rid of those things. And I want to start thinking about using our router as something that we want to do. Okay, so we want to route on the back end. Okay, so now that we've created our router, we need to use it. And we want to do that before we do any of this. So we're going to say something like, so some more configuration. We're going to say app.use router. And this mounts the router middleware. Okay, so it's the express router middleware function. So it's built in. There's nothing for you to do. It's a built-in function, pre-bundled, right? And once we've mounted it, right, then what we can do with it is we can do routing with the front end. Okay, so how would this work? How will this piece work after we've mounted it, right? Well, what we want to do is we want to do a router.get. And notice that we have all of our paths. So we don't want to do it up here. We want to wait for our views to be defined, right? And like I said, order matters. After this, we want to do a router.get. And we want a router.get where we're looking at the main route. Okay, that's our default route. And we want to have a callback function where we have a request, response, and next object. And inside of our route, what we want is to do a res render where we target the index template. Index template is inside of our views, remember, because we defined up here in our set, we said that all of our views are inside of ./views. That's what we're saying, okay? So we're saying, okay, good. So get to the index route, or the index template, which is this one. And then what we want to do is we want to pass in a function, pass in an object, which is that has a title property, which we're going to define as hello world. Okay, that's what it's going to do. It's going to res render this. And then after that, we're going to do a next. So if there's a next function, we're going to go to the next one. Okay. So far, hopefully so good when we get to this point. And if I go back, save this, it's going to, notice we don't need the file system module anymore. We can remove that. Okay, that is removable. But we do need express and path at this point. And what I want to do is let's check to see what our files do now. Now, we're not going to get all this other stuff that we had before. If I go here and put in enter, we're going to actually get a cannot get. And we're getting a cannot get because there is no route for login anymore, right? And in fact, what I can say is if I go localhost 3000, I should get a hello world. However, if I do this and if I press Control-Shift-J, you're going to see there's a pile of errors. A pile of errors that are going to come in. Why? Why are there a pile of errors? Well, let's take a look at what it says. It says, I can't find namespace. I can't find Bootstrap. I can't find router. I can't find any of this stuff. What? How can I not find everything? I'm going to ask you. Well, and if you open this up, you're going to get a pile more errors where it says it refused to apply a style from Bootstrap and a bunch of other stuff. Why? Well, the hint comes back to what you're looking at. Remember, we did this piece. We said that we're going to path join our directory name with views. Okay? So that means views is on the directory name, which means that inside of my index.ejs, I don't have to do a full qualified path name. I can just say Bootstrap. I can just say Font Awesome. I can just say content, right? Well, not yet, actually. Right now, for now, I have to do this, okay? But I can definitely do anything to do with, let me undo those changes. I can't find node modules, right? I can't find node modules. I can't find any of this stuff because it's not inside of views. It doesn't know how to path to this stuff at all. That's what we're having a problem with. So I need to create a way, a method to get to these things. And we're going to do that with static routing. So the way this works is I'm going to add in these I'm going to add more middleware, these two middleware functions here. Okay, make sure you save your make sure you save your files, Cooper. There might be something unsaved. And remember that when you check that there is a closing tag, the way to check the closing tag is to make sure that when you go back to your index.ejs, that you have the closing tag. Make sure that both things have a closing tag and they're well formed. Sometimes just a little bit of an error, if you forget one of these things, it's going to error out. Okay, but I've kind of copied some stuff onto the chat, these two pieces, where we can use the express static middleware function to path join something called client and something called node modules to the path. Well, what we want to do first is we want to make a brand new folder for all of our client or front end data. So what we want to do is make a new folder. We're going to call this client. And what I want to do is take the content folder and pass it in there. I want to take the data folder and move it there, as well as the scripts folder and move it there too. So now the client folder has content, data, and scripts inside of it. And what I can do is node modules is outside. So it looks kind of like this. Client, content, data, scripts, node modules. Cool. So what I want to do is inside of my server.ts, I can add those two paths as well. So when I come to this point, it has everything in there. And I can do that in a number of places. I could do that up here, or I can do that down here. It doesn't really matter in this case. Order does matter, but I'm going to probably do an app use, and I'm going to app use express.static, right? And I'm going to do a path.join, right, with my dir name and the route, which is ./client, okay? And what this does, if I can spell path, what this does is it adds the client with all of its subpaths to the main path of our application. Let's do it again. And this time, let's add in node modules. So node modules would be here. Let's just change this to node modules. Okay, so all the node modules are added to the path too. And if I press save, now what it allows me to do is go back to my index.ejs, which is inside my views folder, and then remove some of these things. I don't need node modules, I just need Bootstrap. I don't need node modules, I just need font awesome. I don't need the /, I just need content. I just need scripts. So I can get rid of these /, because now scripts are part of the path. Same thing with node modules down here. Get rid of all this stuff. And if I did this, and I stop to this point and press save, right? Now we can see that if I go back to my page, so to here, and if I press refresh, we're going to see all the errors go away. And here's Hello World. And Hello World is actually using Bootstrap, because you can tell it's pushed in, which means we're using a container class, and the font is changed. So, okay, we did this piece, and this is great, but how do I load all my other content? Now, that is the topic of another day. The topic for Friday is how do I load my other content with a router? Because, my friends, now we get into some other issues. We solve one problem and break something else. Okay. So I've got my router. This is awesome. But what if I want my index to use my stuff that I had before? So in my index.ejs, at the bottom, I took up my app.js. Let's put it back and see what it gives us. And you're going to see that we're going to get a bunch of errors again. So we're going to go to scripts, and we're going to go to app.js and press save. We're putting that back. And when we do this and go back out to our page, and if I press refresh, we're going to get a bunch of errors. Why are we getting these errors? Now, you may think that, well, views are part of the path, Tom. And if we go to this views, we're going to see that, how come it's not there? I mean, we know that views are part of the path. And that error that we're getting comes from our app.js inside of our client scripts folder. So that's inside of here. And if I go to the first one, it can show us where that comes from, right? Because I load my header, and I'm loading ./views components, header.html, And guess what? Views are on the path. So for you, you might say something like, well, that's okay because I can just take away this views and we're good to go, and press save. And if you thought this would work, well, you'd be wrong. Because if I go back to that, let's go to this and press save, we're still going to get this console log that has our components header as an error. Why? Why can we not get this? Why is this a 404? The hint is here. It's here. We're doing a GET request, okay? And the GET request is being triggered by jQuery. It's saying, do a GET request, please, and go to this. Well, my question is, we're doing a GET request, but inside of our code, right, which is inside of our server.ts here, our GET requests, we are not listening for that kind of GET request, right? We're listening for only one, just this one. The rest are being ignored, and anything else we put in there, it's like a cannot get, a 404. The reason why we're not getting it up here is because we're giving it what it wants, but remember we're doing multiple GET requests as we're reading through the EJS file, right? It's going through the server, so take a look. It's going through the server, and it's saying, okay, I understand how to get all this. I do understand how to get all this, and even all of this, but I can't get something from inside of these because it's making a GET request. None of these things so far have made a GET request except for my script. This is what's making a GET request in here. I need to deal with it, and I have nothing to deal with that GET request right now. Does that make sense? So it's a back-end problem that's impacting my front-end script, okay? Because my script, and you may not get it, but my script is trying to make a GET request happen. Again, take a look at that app.ts. It's saying do a GET request. It's not a URL that I'm going to. I'm not redirecting. I'm injecting, and I'm doing it with AJAX. AJAX being asynchronous. Asynchronous AJAX using a GET request. A GET request that we have no routing for. We have no routing that we've defined. We've only defined a single route, which is our main route. Okay. All right. I like it. Right? But then what do we do with that other stuff? What happens with, an unknown, file, a GET request that I want to make on the back end? Can I never do that? Is it possible that I'm never going to be able to load something because it doesn't handle that request? So, well, we can try. We can make our own GET request, router.get. And what are we listening for? Well, we could listen to everything. We could say that, hey, if anything comes inbound, right? So if we listen for, well, like anything, we could say that. We could say if anything comes inbound, then do something. So let's log this out, request, response, and next, right? And what happens when we come here, right? Can we get this wildcard function happening, right? Is that possible? Can you do that kind of request if any request comes into play at all for anything else? Or do we even have to put a function in there? Can I just do something like this? Is that possible? Well, no, you need a path. That's what it tells you. You need a URL, okay? So if I do a console log, let's do a console log here, like an actual synchronous console log that kind of puts out that request URL. Let's see what that is from here. Can we get that? And let's also call the next function down the line, right? So we don't want to make this blocking, okay? Is that possible? Can we do something like this, a wildcard GET request? And, well, nice idea, but if I do that now and I go back to this, then you're still going to have the same thing. You're still going to have that same problem, right? So, what did it log, though? Did it ever get to that request at all? So let's try that. So again, go back and control backtick, and let's take a look at Node, and yeah, it did this logging, right? Remember, we don't have a logger anywhere else. The only place we're logging is right here, right now, in this random function, right? So this function takes any request and it logs it, okay? It logs it in. That's what it does. So here's all the things we're looking for, right? Components, header, and blah, 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 right? So it says if I get one of these requests, right? If I get a random request that I don't know what it is, something else other than this, right? We're going to output this, right? Some other request that we're going to get out there. I could res render the request we're getting, right? So we look, yeah, the bottom three, these are the bottom three. That's where the requests that are coming inbound. That's coming, guys. Those are requests. And we don't have any way of dealing with those requests. We have no idea how we're going to do those get requests, right? So if I get a get request, now I can be very specific to deal with this problem. I could say, well, if I get, a request for something like header, .html, what if I do that? If I get a request for header.html, then what do I want to respond with? Well, I could respond with whatever data I want. So I could say res.send, I can send some data, and whatever the data is that I get, I can send that off. Wait, what? What data am I getting? I'm not getting any data. I can't respond with anything, right? I mean, can I just do a response send it back if I get my header HTML? Well, let's try this out. So save, right? And if I go back to my app.ts, which is up here, and let's just look for header.html. Remember, we can look for whatever we want now at this point. Header.html, right? Save. And if I go to the top here and if I refresh, then we're going to get cannot get because it doesn't understand home. We never kind of did that. But if I do this, it's going to say header.html 404 found not found. I don't know what that is. That means that I'm trying to put in something like header.html here, and there is no header.html, even though I've put it inside of my server. Okay, let's cut this down even more. Let's make it so that header is just /header, because that's how it would be formed, /header, okay? Let's see if this works. So I'm just gonna return /header. I'm just gonna respond with nothing. So it's not gonna error out. And inside of my app.ts, let's save this. Inside of my app.ts, I'm just gonna go /header. Okay, that's what I want for now. Okay. And it's not going to reload anything, but I'm just trying to stop it from getting an error to show you what I'm talking about. So if I do that and press refresh, so if I go back to / by itself, so /, and I go there, then now that header is gone. Look at that, that header went away because we had a way of responding. We didn't do anything with it, right? We never did anything with it, but if you look back at what's happening, right? If I responded, so if I press, kind of go back and do an enter, right? You would expect that there would be an error, but we don't have an error, right? We're trying to get HTML data back from the GET request, and we're not getting data back. That's not happening, guys, right? We want to respond with data. We want to return data back from when we're looking, right? That's where we're looking. This is where, if you want to, we can return some kind of value back from this, right? So again, going back to our server.ts /header, okay, fine. We're dealing with it by sending nothing back. Okay, we're res sending. Res send says, here's what I can send. I can send a new buffer, right? Some kind of new buffer. I can send some kind of data, JSON, right? That's what I can send, right? I can do a lot of different things, whatever I get back from the thing. In fact, I can put in a file system here where when I get some kind of random other object, whatever I get here, right? That's what I'm going to respond with out here, right? So this is what the header does, as an example. I want to inject my header. Okay, fine. So when I get the header request, well, then what I want to do is I want a file system read. That's what I want to do. So let's go back and put that file system in place again. I could do this, but what a waste. I could do this, right? And what I could do is I can say something like we did before. We can say file system.read file, right? And I can read file the header. I know what I'm reading. The path is going to be to the header file. So where is that header file? It's inside of views components. So I could say components slash header.html. That's where I'm looking. That's the file I want to read, right? And then what do I want to do? I want to respond with a request response object where I want to return the data out. So actually what I'm getting is it should be a request, an error, and a data object. Here's my error and data object. And what I want to do is I want to respond with the error, the data object, where I'm going to send the data back out from whatever I'm reading back to the calling function. Let's see if that works. All right, so that's a little header that we have just for header. And if I did that and go back to this and just get rid of this piece and press enter, then what happened? I mean, I responded with the data, but what did it do with the data? Well, it comes back to the asynchronous nature of code. Sure, I'm responding with the data, but what data is incoming? Let's try and read that data. So let's do a console log, and let's read that data, right? So again, I'm going to come back here, and this is our problem we're trying to solve. And we do it, we come back to here, and undefined. It comes back undefined. Which means either we couldn't read this file, components header.html. So I'm looking inside of components, header.html. I can't seem to read this file, this read file, right? Even though it's inside of views. Why is that? Why is that? I mean, it should work because when I'm inside of my index.ejs, right, I can certainly read other stuff. I can certainly read those things, no problem, but not when it comes to inside of my views. I could try a more, kind of a full path instead. I could do that, right? So again, going back to our page, server.ts, I could say, okay, well, that's fine. Don't worry about that. Just read slash views slash components, right? Dot header HTML and read that. Let's see that now. So save. And again, what I want to do is I'm going to go in here and press enter and go back to here and we get undefined. Why? Why am I getting undefined? Did I not set up this read file the right way? Isn't that what I did? Can you explain to me why it's happening? We can't send anything back unless we get something to send is the answer, right? And we're trying to use read file kind of the last way we did it, right? Where we're using a get request. The get request is coming inbound. We're getting here, guys. We're getting this because it's actually responding with undefined, right? But I'm trying to read my components inside of my views folder and I'm getting nowhere. Like I'm literally not getting any kind of error at all. Let's do an error. Remember, we can do this too. We can say if error, what's the error we're getting? Are we getting an error? We're just ignoring the error. So we can say that, okay, that's fine. Let's return out of here if we get an error. This first thing. And let's do a couple things. We can say that I want to, just like we did before, res end, let's end with an error. And that error is going to be something like, we'll say something like error 404. File not found, and we can also add in the error.message to output to the screen. All right, if we get an error. Okay, we're actually going to end. We're going to stop if we get this error. Okay, let's see if we get an error. So going back out, I'm going to go back to here, and we're going to press enter, and it says error 404, file not found, no such file or directory, C:\views components header.html. Huh. That sucks. Well, again, it comes back to what I'm trying to read. Remember what we did last time? We had our header and we tried to do our views. There is no views. There's no such thing as views in our C on our box. C:\views. That's not going to happen, right? We need to go to C:, whatever the directory name is, /views, and so on. So we're going to say that, okay, this is okay. Nice, Tom. I like it. But we're going to add this path onto our __ dir name, right? Plus this thing. That's what I want to see. Does this get me the function now? So save. And let's see what happens if we do it now. Oh, hey, that gave me an error. Oh, that took a long time too. Look at that. It was like, whoo, no, it didn't like that at all. It said 404 header not found. What? Oh yeah, it broke. It broke big time. What happened? Well, it said, okay, cool. I was able to try and set my header, and it says cannot set headers after they are sent to the client, right? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to send, right? Again, the data that we're getting back, right? And this is happening asynchronously. And why? But why is it happening, right? Well, let's take a look. Did we get the data anyway? Did we ever get the data? We never got to that point, right? Because the data that we got was a buffer. Remember this buffer thing that we got last time? How do we convert the data to something that is not this? Remember our read file from last day? Let's take a look at our stuff, guys. Remember Durham Programmer? We had that stuff in there from last day. Here's section 4, right? Actually, we should just respond with section 3 because that's you guys. Here's section 3. And last week in ICE 9, this is ICE 9. And if we look in there to our server.ts, we had this. We wrote an end. We wrote a 404. So let's take that back. We need to write a 404. We forgot to do that. Again, I was just writing off the cuff, right? We also have to write a Mime type, a write end. We made a response end is what we did here. An end to the response. We did a send, not an end, right? And we did it here. Let's do an end instead of a send. And response end, we can output the content to what we're going to do here, right? And we're also calling next. Let's see if that fixes my problem. So again, it'll reboot my server. And coming back to here, I can try it again. And no, it gave me the same error and it crashed again. It says, nope, it says, we tried to send this out to you, Tom, but you do not know what you're asking me for, kind of thing. That's what it's saying. Again, going back to what we did last day, what did we do different? It was the exact same, right? We read the file. We were able to read the file. We were able to get some data, right? But we wrote ahead. That's what we did. We wrote head and we did a response end, but the write head was 200. And we looked it up and we set the header and all this kind of stuff and MIME types and blah, 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 blah. We don't have to do that anymore, right? That wasn't something we need to do anymore, I thought. Interesting. Can I do a return res end? Can I do that? Which returns out of here, and then when it returns out of here, then it comes back to the main calling function where I can do something with it. And let's not call next in this case, because it's the last function that we want to write. So let's see what it does now. Does this work any better when I return, and is it bad? So get returns, right? My get function itself doesn't return much. I have to do something with it when I go and render. All right, now let's go back, try it again, right? And we'll go here, and we're getting closer to getting some kind of resolution because we are reading. Okay, now there's no error anymore. Okay, but what happened? Well, it says that the buffer that we're listing for is a bunch of bytes. There's the buffer. Okay, but what happened to the data? So yeah, the buffer was returned. That's what this does. This is return res end, right? End returns a buffer of data, right? And what we need to do is we need to response end that data. So we're going to, when it comes back out here, we want to do a response dot send, right? and we want to send that data off, whatever that body is. So that data kind of leaves, and whatever the body of that data is, I get it, and I'm going to send it off, whatever that body is. Let's see what we get when we do a response send. Okay, and now you're confused, and I know you are, but that's okay. And we did it, and now we responded with this thing, but nothing happened. What is the data that we're responding to? What is this data, and how come we got this piece? This is the data, but the data that came back was like a HTML document, but it didn't look like an HTML document. It looked like, well, something else. It wasn't HTML that we got back at all. So remember what we can do. When we res end, we can say that the content type, so content type, we can specify that the content type is of HTML, text/HTML, if I'm not wrong. That's what we want to be able to do in our response end. Again, if I look back online and see what we did last time, we did this piece where we did a write head to this. That's the Mime type that we specified. Let's just grab this piece so we can specify the type. So we're saying, hey, let's write head, and we're going to say that the type is text/HTML, and I want to return that data outbound when I'm done. So after I've written the head, whatever that head is, I want to return this data, and let's do that console data stuff here before we output it. Does that make any difference? By the way, the asynchronous nature of JavaScript. You can see the trouble we're having, right? And again, if I go here and I type in, we're going to get no error. Oh, that's weird. Oh, there they go. See that? That was like, took time for it to come back. And right, we totally got an error. We got an error that said we cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. Okay, so, whoa, what does this mean? That means that we're trying to send two headers to the client. We're trying to return this type, which is we're writing again to the same HTML the second time. We're saying that we're returning HTML type. And that's an issue, okay? So again, try and do this file safe. By the way, there's a way to do this, but there's a lot of work to do when we don't have to do it. This is just for one thing we're injecting. Isn't there a better way to do this? And the answer is, on Friday, there certainly is. And if it's hurting your head, Cooper, you can see I might be hurting everyone else's too. Okay, so again, issues. We solved one problem and we created another problem. We cannot do this kind of stuff the way it is from inside of our code. Is there a way of handling GET requests? Yes, there is. We dealt with the GET request. This is the GET request here. But what do? We cannot render anything. We could res.return JSON data. We could do that, right? So we can convert our data to JSON, and then we could turn it back, right? We could do that. So we could render JSON. Instead of doing this part, we could render whatever the data we're getting into our header. We could res.render whatever that file is. So we could try doing that, but that would be an issue. If we read the file, whatever that file is, instead of reading the file, we could say, okay, don't read the file. Let's do something different than this, because reading file clearly doesn't work. What if we said res.render, right? And we wanted to res.render, where, well, we're going to use the index thing again, and we're going to render that file. We've already done a res render, by the way, and we're going to pass in the same index, title, where we're going to render, something like, I don't know, header, just to show you that this works, okay? What if we did this instead? Just like we did this. So what happens now if I did this? So if I did this and I go back to here and we res render, oh God. And we get both header and hello world, and we get a pile of errors here again. Why is that? It says identifier router has already been declared, right? We're calling it twice and we're rendering it twice. We're going through that rendering step the second time. So this is definitely not the way to do it. It'll do exactly what I told it to do, right? But we don't want to do a GET request to return it back to our browser. We want to do a res render, right, where we return our data back to our our stuff. Now look what it also says. There's some other things we can do here too. So we have a res send file. Okay, we have a bunch of other stuff that we can do as well. Res has a bunch of stuff that it can do beyond just a stuff. Let's say I did a res send file instead, right? So it says, what's the file path? Okay, now this is the thing like us reading again. I can look at the file path, which is __ name plus our header.html, right? Which is our /views /components /header.html. We're returning that file. That's the send file that we're doing. And we're sending that back, right? That's what we're doing back to our request, right? We're sending this, and then we're doing next. How about this? Does this work? So this is a very specific way of doing things. And how about that? This is the last thing we'll try. And again, it says, don't know what header is, right? Even though we told it exactly what to do. Remember, we don't have access to what we're looking at right now to know what there's an error happening here. Our send file, we can do an error callback, a function. So function error, right? And what we can do with the send file error is we can console out console.error, the error, whatever that is. Let's console it out and try it again the last time to see what that error is. And you're going to see what the problem is. It's going to say no such file or directory. See users, Chili, OneDrive, desktop, Durham, blah, 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 section 3, ICE 10. And what the heck is this dot? It doesn't need dot because it's trying to do dot views. No, that's not what it needs. So just views is what it's looking at, like so. So that is what the problem is, seriously. And then if I go back, it still gives us this error and it says, okay, cool. Well, you tried me again, but we have another problem. It says users, Durham, and it says ICE 10. That is the thing. And then it's still got the same thing that you're trying to render, right? That same path, which makes no sense. Why are we getting this extra dot? Because it's trying to return that, and it doesn't know what that is. There is no ICE 10 dot. Where are we getting that from, right? So you can see that there's issues, okay? And we can certainly sanitize the path and remove it, and we didn't put a dot this time around. Heck, we can actually remove the views and try this. It's not going to make a difference, guys. Just letting you know. No matter what I do, no matter how often I do this, right? It's not going to create an easy way of us doing that. You're going to see that now it smashes them together. Huh? How come I did that? Well, it needs a backslash. We put the backslash in place last time and it didn't work. Save. It doesn't matter. We're going to go back and forth, making my head hurt now too. Right? And undefined is what we get. Right? We didn't get an error. This didn't break, but it says that ICE views thing doesn't work. It doesn't know what that is. And it gives us these weird errors over and over again. So that's what next does. And next does, it says undefined because there is nothing that it can produce, and that's a problem. Header loads, but doesn't return any data. That's what send file does. It doesn't do anything, right? Because even though it loads, and if I was going to, what happens, so this is our error. Remember that send file has one overload where we have a path and an error callback, right? So this is what happens when the error is sent back. Otherwise, it sends the file, that's the actual file itself, back to the calling function. And then in our app.ts, what we're saying is, okay, cool, we're getting that error or that file. What is the file that we're getting? Let's check it to see what that does. We're going to be doing a GET request and is returning the file that comes back to us. So let's then just do a console log back to this to the front end, which is my HTML data. And we'll try it one more time. And we get all this. We got it. Here's the data. Look, we finally did it. And look up here. We got that data. So that was a very long round trip for us to get this done, for one file to happen, right? I'm just putting it out there, right? Where we were able to get the data back out. And that's what was happening on this server side. The server side was returning the data. It went to next. It rendered it out. And that's what returned that data back out to the file, specifically for the header. Whenever we ask for the header, we get the header back out there. And now, you know, that is the first part. We still have the other pieces. So if I was to go further, you can see that we have this piece. It actually does all this. But now we have all the content and components and all that other stuff. Look, it still has a problem getting our views, content, contact, our views, content, services. That is content. That's a new thing that we're going to get because that's another GET request. And that's a GET request for each one of these things. Is it a way to do it? Yes, it is. Should we do it? No, we shouldn't. Not like this. Could we do it? Yes, we could. All right, but we're getting closer, and that's the thing that it does. It tells us where the errors are because we have to do a GET request. That's each of them is a GET request, guys. Each of these things is a GET request. And there's another way, a better way to do it than this, without using AJAX. All right, any questions before we move on for the day? We're going to solve this problem on Friday. I know we went overtime. We're going to solve this problem on Friday, and the problem is going to be solved with back-end routing, not front-end routing. Okay, guys, that's it for me today. Any questions before we go on for the day? One thing I have to also point out, guys, before you leave is remember that when we come back, first of all, we're going to talk about the express generator. That's what we're going to do. The express generator is the way we're going to create our site to restructure things the way we want them to be restructured. And remember that tonight, lab 3 is due by midnight. I'm going to stop recording now, and I'll take any questions you might have. Okay, one sec, Drew.
This is all the